Swift financial system and a skeleton key held by the Vatican. What does that actually mean, and how could that really work? All over social media, we've heard the buzz about the Vatican, and in particular, the Swift financial system and something called a skeleton key. The first question I had is like, what are we even talking about? Second question I had is like, why would the Vatican have it? And third is, what is this going to do, or how does this affect their daily life? I did want to be like, okay, am I realistically thinking what I'm thinking? Because the skeleton key, when you use in a lock, is basically like a master key that is designed in such a way to where it can open up a multitude of locks, right? That are keyed differently. So it allows you to get into numerous doors. Like you'd have a skeleton key for a particular type of lock. And it's usually only held by the lock manufacturer or locksmiths, things like that.
So then why would the Vatican even have one?
Well, why would the Vatican have a skeleton key, in particular for the whole world's financial system, right? Let's not even go there. Let's start off with this. So it was rumored about the Vatican being in possession of a skeleton key for the SWIFT financial system. I have no idea the validity of that. But let's explore even what that means if it was possibly true for anyone to have a skeleton key for the world financial system, also known as the SWIFT messaging system. So for those of you out there who don't understand the basics of the SWIFT, SWIFT is really a messaging system that allows the banks to communicate and tell you like that these funds are being pulled from this bank and being deposited to this bank and this routing information and this account information. So it's really a messaging system. Some people think of it as a ledger and all this kind of stuff. It's not. It's actually just a messaging system. It's so that you can keep accounting of where the things came from and where they're going to. You can account for transaction history. That's all it is the messaging system for transaction history. So then the question I had is like, okay, well, what is the significance of a skeleton key having access to that? And why would you call it a skeleton key? So what it would mean in this instance is that they would have access to all the different areas for which the messaging system interacts with each other. And they would be able to get remote access into that location and could make edits or change the record of the messaging system.
That's the skeleton key. Like that's where that comes into play.
So if you had a skeleton key to the SWIFT messaging financial system, the SWIFT financial system, you could go in and you could remotely access and change those records. It would be like let's put it this way. It would be like getting remote access to your friend's phone and being able to change their text messages. So just think about what you could do but it's your friend. Let's say your enemy's phone. Let's say you can access your enemy's phone and make whatever changes to their text messages sent and received that you want without them ever knowing you were there.
That's a lot of power to have.
That's a lot of power. So again, it's not a bank or a ledger. It's a communication layer that the banks use to report transfers between bank to bank. And it's used around the world. So it's used if you were transporting or sending money to someone overseas, you would use the SWIFT system, also on a local level, right? So the skeleton key would allow real-time unrestricted visibility into all messaging traffic. Every transfer request, metadata, timestamps, sender receiver details, and they would have the ability then to presumably edit all that. So they could completely remove transactions, or they could, meaning the person that would have control of that, could quadruple a delivery of cash from one area to another, or pull funds from one area, deliver it to themselves, and erase the footprints of that ever occurring. So all of a sudden you just look into your bank account and it would be less money, but then it would be in the skeleton key holder's account. They could do that. Or they could be like Robin Hood and decide to give everyone else a bonus and a raise for Christmas.
Yeah, I mean, you could.
And they could erase all the history of that as well. So there'd be no history or the timestamps in the communication end. So it still happened transactionally. I guess you could probably diagnose it as far as the bank account, like how the bank accounts route. But as far as the messaging end of how the banks use the SWIFT communication system, there'd be no history of it.
That's too much power for anybody to have.
Well, it talks about what you potentially could do with this kind of. So one, geopolitical power. The holder has leverage over the U.S. Treasury, the International Monetary Fund. They can blacklist nations covertly. freeze assets silently, or you could even frame other countries as if they had given deposits and or transfers to organizations or groups that are unfriendly to human civilization and make them look like bad guys. You could also cause economic warfare, collapse currencies and banking systems through targeted manipulation. You could also simulate a cyber attack or an external hack and make it look as if that occurred. You could basically be in financial god mode. For those of you who've played a video game, it's essentially like a cheat code over the global financial system for the world. So the way in which the global financial system works and its communication, you could have complete control to erase or add history of that. So it's pretty significant if someone were to have such a thing.
So then why all of a sudden is it getting pointed that the Vatican could be doing that?
I have no idea. All I wanted to do was understand if someone did have a skeleton key into the SWIFT financial system, what that could potentially mean and what they could potentially do. How does someone even get access to such a thing, or how could a thing like a skeleton key exist in the SWIFT financial system? Potentially could have been embedded in root access or a backdoor early formation in the creation of the SWIFT system and then handed over to someone, like given the access and codes. Possibly hardware level or root software exploit baked into the foundational nodes or mirrors of the SWIFT network. Man in the middle infrastructure, a covert intercept systems mirroring all SWIFT data streams. So it could be that they built it later and figured out how to mimic the SWIFT data streams and kind of like almost like building an inlet on a highway. They just built an inlet and that allowed them then to knock the traffic off and replace it with their own version, right? Think of the bank transfer as a truck driving down the highway. They simply build an exit ramp and then put a very similar truck, but that's going to a different destination or has a different logo on the side in its place. So that could be one, a man in the middle type thing. Number 3, I think, is kind of the most interesting of the possibilities, AI or algorithmic monitoring systems. So it seems odd that one of the suggestions is that AI could be involved, and we're kind of in the day and age where AI has become much more dominant in discussions and conversation. So with that volume of data, an AI surveillance suite could be trained to detect emerging financial patterns, identify hidden funding routes, and trigger alerts based on nation state behaviors. Also, code word signaling or dual layer messaging. Some claim certain SWIFT messages include coded language. A skeleton key might also allow the decryption of covert communication layered into financial transactions. So what does that mean? It means that in this communication system, just like for those of you who are around for pagers, or what's like the cool thing now that people use, like emojis maybe? Like messages with your friends or ways in which you communicate with your friends. A level of sarcasm when you're like, oh yeah.
I mean stickers.
Sending stickers, sending emojis. These are all ways in which you communicate somewhat secretively, right? To where you and your friends know why you're using that particular emoji because it relates to some story, right? Similarly, within the SWIFT messaging system, you could do the same thing amongst countries or amongst financial big banks or whatever you want to say. From point A to point B. And they could be communicating about the transfer of this money with the dollar amount, the address that it's being sent to, the routing information, the notes that are associated with it. They could be sending each other information and messages that way as well. Yeah.
Like hidden code words.
Basically, yeah, right? Like let's say a conversation happens on the back door. Let's talk about a peace thing, a very peaceful thing, and everyone wants world peace. But one country is afraid of how they look in public, if this other country may do one thing versus another, and they're waiting. And they could very easily send a transfer of $100,000 or $100,003, and that indicates that it's not going to happen. They're guaranteeing it's not going to happen. Or it indicates that it is going to happen in a way to like kind of give a warning that's not necessarily public, and also would just leave conspiracy theory claiming that they do this form of communication, almost like hidden ciphers in newspapers back in the 70s and 80s.
It's what conspiracy theories love to do, though, is to find these hidden messages.
Yeah. At the end of the day, a skeleton key gives them access to the SWIFT messaging system which runs the world financial system as far as exchange and transfers of money on that in the world on that system. It's a messaging system. It's not really a ledger system. It's not a bank itself. They would have then access to change it and say money went from point A to point B at 12 o'clock and it was 100K to money went from point C to point D at 2 p.m. and it was 50K. Or they could just erase the entire history of the transaction within the messaging system and money just goes from point A to point B and then they erase the history of it.
That's a lot it can do.
Yeah. So I'd suggest the Vatican can send the money from point A to point B and just erase the history of it.
I don't know. It's just been under fire a lot this week.
Yeah. So who knows what occurred there? It's odd, the allegations, along with the timing of what's going on in the world, along with the timing of what's recently happened in the Vatican and the change up there, along with the timing of what's happened with the Vatican over a period of years now, where we've heard multiple reports coming out about changes, closures, investigations, things of that nature that have occurred there. And then now to have this be thrown on their plate seems, one, unusual timing, and two, highly unfortunate, and three, potentially a part of disclosure for those people who seem to be batting 1,000 who used to be crazy. I don't know. You let us know. What's your disagreement? What do you think? Do you think it's likely that the Vatican has a skeleton key? And do you think they used it and why? And do you think it's impossible that the Vatican had access to such a thing and why? Do you even care if the Vatican had a skeleton key and why?